All right, class. Welcome to our first main exercise. Now, if you go to week 1 within your Blackboard, within course documents, you'll see this Classic Tweening animated banner exercise. So we're going to be building this this banner here. It says fish design. There's going to be bubbles floating, fish swimming, and this shell spinning. So this exercise is great because it's going to show us a lot in terms of what simple linear animation, how to create a very simple linear animation using tweening. And we're going to be starting off with classic tweening. And I'll explain what all that means as we move along. Now, I'll probably spend a bit of time explaining a few things as we go that I would normally do in class with you. So this is an important one. We're learning in these first number of weeks, we're learning the foundation of linear animation within Animate. So I would recommend maybe even completing these exercises more than once, just as practice. And everything we're learning in this exercise, you need to know for your in-class assignment that is going to be due at the end of the week. And that's all within week 1. So I'll be covering everything you need to know for that. And if I'm not covering everything, I will give you a few tips either at the end of the video or maybe at the beginning. Maybe that's the best way to do this, just kind of give you a bit of a rundown. So animation. Well, a good way of visualizing animation. So let's actually build a very simple animation before we start this exercise. I think that's maybe the best way to move forward. So I'm going to open up Animate. I'm going to click on the Web tab here at the top, and I'm just going to choose medium 800 by 600. And I'm going to make sure I'm at 24 frames per second and HTML5 canvas. I'm going to hit Create. All right, so I'm going to save this right off the bat. We'll call it Demo. And let me just save this. Okay, so I'm going to just give you a quick rundown of how to build a simple animation. Now, when animating in Animate, you need to visualize it as properties changing over time. So when you have, say, a ball bouncing or an airplane flying through the sky, what are the properties that are changing? So for the airplane flying through the sky, you've got it starting at one set of coordinates, x and y coordinates, and ending up at another set of coordinates, x and y. So let's just do that. I'm going to draw a ball, and let's use a black stroke, blue fill color. I'm going to hold down Shift and draw a perfect circle here. Nothing too large. Now in Animate, to animate this object here, I need to convert it to a symbol. So I'm going to select it, and right-click on it and choose Convert to Symbol, or you can hit F8 on your keyboard. And I'm going to call it this window will pop up. I'm going to call it ball. And the type is movie clip symbol. And let's not worry about the registration mark right now. So I hit OK. Now, where did that just end up? Well, if you look to your library, you'll see your ball symbol sitting there now. Awesome. Okay. So I want this ball to start up here and end up down at the bottom of the screen. So this will take time. Yet we have to determine how long do I want this animation to last. Is it falling from the sky really quickly, or is it slow? Maybe it's a balloon, maybe it's just floating down. So I'm going to say 1 second, which is 24 frames. So after that's determined, you need to realize with an animation, there needs to be a start and an end point to your animation. So where is the animation starting? So what's the property that is starting? And how is that property going to change at the end? So you have a start and an end. So for me, my start point is going to be the ball's going to start up here. And over 24 frames, it will fall and land down here. And its properties will change. Its X and Y coordinates will change. All right, so now that I've determined all that, I can now build it. So on the timeline here, I've got my first layer, and we can name this ball. I'm going to highlight frame 24 of the timeline, right-click on it, and choose Insert Keyframe. So a keyframe is very important to building our animation. You have, and they are designated by these dots. So I have a keyframe in frame 1 and a keyframe in frame 2. And in fact, you can see these keyframes as our start and end point. So if I select keyframe 1 in frame 1, this is my start point. So this is where my ball is going to be. And my end point, frame 24, where do I want my ball? I want it down on the ground. So I'm going to select frame 24, where that keyframe, that second keyframe is. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and bring my ball down. I'm holding down Shift so it's a straight line. Okay, so now when I move my playhead, by the way, you can, excuse me, move your playhead like this by grabbing the red box. If I move my playhead left to right, you'll see my ball starts at the top and then suddenly jumps down to the bottom. So we're not complete here. We need to create what's called a classic tween. And that is the way we animate. So it's going to move in a smooth linear motion. Our ball's going to start at the top and end up at the bottom. So to do that, you right click anywhere between frames 1 and 24 within this frame span and choose Create Classic Tween. And it should turn like a purpley blue color, and an arrow should run from the first keyframe to the next. If your arrow is a broken dashed line, that means you didn't, that you're missing the next keyframe. So if I were to, let's just say I deleted this frame, I see a dotted line here. That means it's broken, and you should deal with that right away. So I'm going to hit undo. So now when I move my playhead from left to right, you can see it smoothly moving. So if you hit enter on your keyboard, you'll see it falling. Now, you can you don't have to just adjust your XY properties. What if I want the ball to grow as it's falling? So again, I can add that into my second keyframe. So I want the ball to end up larger. So what I can do is highlight that second keyframe in the timeline, turn on my free transform tool in the tool panel, which is the third tool from the top, and I'm going to hold down Shift and I'm going to make this ball larger. So now let's just go back to that foundational knowledge of animation. You need a start point and an end point. So my start point is a ball that starts at the top and is this size. And as it moves down, the end point, it's larger and its XY coordinates have changed. So now when I hit enter, many properties are changing. What else? What if I want it to fade in as it's falling? So that means my starting point, this object's going to be 0% opacity, meaning it's going to be invisible. And as it falls, it's going to fade in to 100% opacity. So I'm going to highlight my first keyframe because that's the property I want to change. That's where that property is. So I highlight frame 1, select the circle, the ball, and in your properties panel, so that's important. Let me just review that. I highlight frame 1, so I've got my playhead sitting in frame 1. Then I click on the ball, and that will give me the properties of this object. Then I can twirl down color effect and change the style to alpha. And the alpha, you can have it start at 0%. So now when I move my playhead, it fades in. And there's so much more we can do. What if I want it to change color as it's going along? Well, I can highlight. What if I want it to end up a different color? I can highlight frame 24, then select the object on the stage. Then in color effect in properties, I can choose tint and maybe no tint. There we go. Yeah. It's going to end up red. So I increase the tint to 100%. Then I drop my green and blues to 0. And I keep red at 255. Now, when I hit enter, it changes color as it goes. So I'm running all this by you before we start our exercise because it's important to your in-class assignment. So you may want to review this. And I just want to show that we can animate several properties within one object, within one timeline layer. Okay? All right, so now let's flip over to our exercise. Where are you? So we'll be reviewing a lot of what we just covered and learning a few more things. So let's open that up. You're going to need your required files. Folder. And there is a start file. So let's open up that start file. and follow along. So we'll be covering in this exercise, we'll be working with graphic symbols. So very similar to movie clip symbols, which we just looked at. We'll be looking at classic tweening, which we also just looked at. We'll also look at using more drawing tools within Animate. So we're going to create a gradient, and we'll also use alpha value to achieve transparency, which we just looked at in the demo, fading in and out effects, which we just looked at in the demo. So we're going to be covering a lot of things, but really I just want you to be working on this as much as possible. Practice makes perfect in Animate. Okay, so like I said already, feel free to complete this exercise more than once for practice. So let's look at our start file here. In our library, what do we have? We have one object already sitting here. It's a seashell. All right. So we also want to turn on a grid to help with drawing. So a grid, we can turn on a grid, and we can also turn on snap to grid, so we can draw objects very accurately to a pixel by pixel grid. So let's turn on that grid. So go to View, Grid, Show Grid. And this grid is a little too tight, so I want to adjust how large the grid spaces are. So I can go to View, Grid, and Edit Grid, and that will open up this window. And the color is fine. Show Grid, and we want to turn on Snap to Grid, and we want to make the grid 20 by 20. And hit OK. Okay, so next we want to import a graphic that will be in your required file folder. It's a graphic of a fish. So how do we get objects into Animate? Fairly easily. If you go to File, Import, you'll see you have a few choices. Import to Stage, Import to Library are our two main import methods that we're going to use. So I'm going to choose Import to Stage. And I am going to go to my exercise folder and choose the fish and hit open. Okay, so I'm going to zoom in a bit on this fish. So this fish is a bitmap image. And you can see the more you zoom in on this, you can see that it's very soft and it's not very sharp looking because it's a bitmap, and it's kind of low resolution. So I don't want to use a bitmap. There's a couple reasons for that in Animate. Bitmaps can be heavy and can decrease the loading or increase the loading time of your animation within a browser. But if we deal with vector images, vector graphics, which are made up with mathematical equations, then things are going to load a lot quicker because vector graphics are a lot lighter. So I can convert this fish into a vector graphic. Yes, it is a very cool tool here in Animate. So select the fish, and in the top menu go Modify, and choose bitmap and trace bitmap. So, by the way, this is a tool also available in Illustrator. Illustrator is a little more advanced, and you can do a lot more things, but it's a pretty cool tool to vectorize one of your bitmaps. All right, so I'm going to change the color threshold to 75, and everything else I'm going to leave the same. And you can hit preview to see what this looks like. So as you can see, it is a very precise, well, it's not too precise. It's a little distorted, but it at least looks a bit better. And you can experiment with how the threshold changes. If I change it to 100, how does that look? Preview. It just has a few more details. I'm going to go with 75 and hit OK. Okay. So next I want to change the background of my my stage here. I want to choose a blue color. So I'm going to do that by going up to Modify, Document. And here we can change a few things. So we're going to be using this window quite a few times, but one thing we can do here is change the stage color. So click on the stage color, and we're going to choose a blue, and it's 33CCFF, and I'm going to hit OK. Now once I do that, you'll see that this fish image isn't looking so hot because it when we traced the image, the white background came with it. Well, that's easy to get rid of. We can just, with our selection tool, which is the top tool, the first tool in our tool panel, you can select these white bits and delete them. And there's our fish. So this fish, though, if I were to try and move it, look what happens. It breaks. So we want to actually select the whole fish and group all the parts together. So with your selection tool, draw a selection box around the fish, then right-click on the fish and choose Group. Oh, Group isn't there, so it would be up in Modify, where is Group? There it is, right in front of me. Okay, now I can move the fish because it's all grouped together. We also know we want to animate this fish, and to animate anything in Animate, I've mentioned this already, it needs to be converted to a symbol. I can't repeat that enough. I'm going to repeat it more. You need to convert the object to a symbol to animate it. Otherwise, you will not be able to animate it. So I'm going to right-click on the fish again and choose Convert to Symbol. And let's call it Fish. And it can be a movie clip symbol. And hit OK. So now in your library, you should see the fish symbol there. Now, to keep the file size down of our animation, we can now delete the JPEG, the fish.jpg in our library. So I'm going to right-click on fish.jpg and choose I gotta zoom out. Delete. And you can hit save. All right. Also, we can delete the fish from the stage. Now you may ask yourself, will that delete the fish entirely? No. If you select it and hit delete, the fish still exists in your library. So you can have many, many objects in your library that aren't actually visible on your stage. So that's good to know. All right, so next we're going to be creating an animated bubble. And we're going to have some bubbles that start at the bottom and are floating up. So first we need to create this bubble. And we're going to draw it. Okay, so let's start with creating a new symbol. So I know this bubble is going to be animated, therefore it needs to be a symbol. So since I already know that, I can actually draw the bubble within a symbol, so it becomes a symbol right off the bat. So to do that, we go to Insert at the top menu, then choose New Symbol, and let's call it Bubble. And it can be a movie clip, and hit OK. So that now we are within the movie clip symbol bubble. How do I know that? If I look to my upper left corner here, we see some breadcrumbs. So this tells me I'm currently in the symbol bubble, and this icon of a cog wheel tells me it's a movie clip symbol. And that symbol is within Scene 1, and Scene 1 is our main timeline. All right. So I'm going to start drawing this bubble. So let's choose the oval tool. And from the properties panel, we are going to have a stroke of black. The stroke is going to be 1 pixel wide, so change that stroke width to 1. We also do not want a fill color quite yet. So click on the fill color and say no fill, which is in the upper right corner. It's this white box with a red strike through it. Click on that, no fill. Now I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and we want to draw a circle that is 4 grid spaces in circumference. So since we have snap to grid on, you can click and drag, starting here. I'll show you that again. I'm starting in the upper left corner of one of my grid spaces, and I want this to be 4 grid spaces high and 4 grid spaces wide. So we're going to fill this circle with a custom gradient that we're going to build that will give the illusion of it being a bubble. So to do that, we need to open up our color panel. So you can do that by choosing Window, Color, or you can click on this panel color icon. Next, we're going to choose from this drop-down that currently says None. I'm going to choose Linear Gradient. And here's where we build a gradient. Sorry, I got to zoom back out. Now, if you've ever created a gradient before, maybe some of you don't know what a gradient is. A gradient is a solid color that transitions from one shade to another shade. So from one color to a second color. Now that gradient can also be a transition from a solid color to a transparency as well. And that's what we're going to do here. We're going to create a gradient that is actually starts transparent and ends up a solid white. So to do that, we need to click on this first color and change its alpha to 0. And then the second color here is going to be a solid white. So its alpha is 100%. Now, I also want this first color to be white as well, just so when it's transitioning, it transitions properly to white. So click on that first, what are these called? This first color slider, and change the color to F, 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 F. And make sure the alpha is 0%. And then we've got white as well at 100%. After you've done that, we're going to save it as a swatch. So click on Add to Swatches. So now when you go to your swatch panel, you'll see it sitting there. Now, what do I do with it now? Well, I can now choose my Paint Bucket tool in the tool panel. Make sure my solid color is my gradient. And if you just click within your circle, your gradient will appear. But it may appear in the wrong direction. We actually want the transparent part to be up top here. So I'm going to click and drag from the top to the bottom. Of my circle. So make sure you're within the circle while you're doing this. And there we get this transparent bubble. Now, after you've done that, let's see, we're going to change the outline of our bubble. So switch over to your selection tool. Click once the stroke of the bubble and change the stroke to white. So that way it looks more like a bubble. And we can change the stroke width to 2 as well. So it's a bit thicker. Now I want to group the fill and the stroke color together. So click and drag your selection tool around the whole bubble. Choose Modify, Group. And let's also align it to our stage. So select the bubble, open up your Align panel. So you can go to Window, Align. And let's choose Align to Stage. So you want to check this box here. Align to Stage. And I'm going to choose Align Horizontal and Vertical. And if you lose your bubble like I just did, it kind of disappeared. You may want to zoom out a bit. Maybe in the upper right corner here, choose 100% or Fit in Window, and you'll see your bubble sitting there. All right, so that's some important steps there that you may want to review. We can also rotate it a little bit too. Let me just see. So if you choose your bubble and open up the transform panel, you can rotate it 40 degrees. That way it's not so linear, not so straight looking. Something like that. That looks cool. Okay, so next we need to animate this bubble. So we'll be creating a classic tween, just like in our demo at the top of this video. And creating a tween, it's one of the most common things to do and animate. Classic tween is how we're going to learn how to do that. We'll eventually be learning how to create just a normal motion tween, but this is a little bit easier to start with. All right, so let's do that. So we'll start by creating a new symbol. So let's go Insert, New Symbol, and we'll call it Animated Bubble. And from your library, let's drag an instance of the bubble movie clip to the stage. And use your Align panel to align it vertically and horizontally to the stage. And we're going to create a classic tween. So for that, we need a start point and an end point. So at least 2 keyframes on this layer. So layer 1. So let's first rename this layer Bubble. And we're going to have our animation happen over 25 frames. So select frame 25, and you can right click on it and choose Insert Keyframe, or highlight it and hit F6 on your keyboard. So this bubble is going to be vertically moving upwards, like it's floating up to the surface. So we've got our starting point already in position, but we need to have an end point for our bubble. So select frame 25, which is our second keyframe. Then select the bubble on the stage and go to your properties panel, and we're going to type in a new Y coordinate. So click on the Y coordinate and type in -180. And we'll see. Hopefully that's enough. That doesn't seem like it's enough of a jump, but we'll see when we get to that point. So okay, so one thing that I forgot to do in the instructions on page 6 is scale down our bubble. So to do that, we're just going to double click the bubble movie clip symbol in the library. So go to your library, double click bubble. Now select the bubble on the stage, open up your transform panel, and we're going to scale the bubble down to 40%. So make sure your width and height percentages are constrained. That's this little change symbol. Make sure that that's on and change it to 40%. so it's smaller. This will solve our problem in our animated bubble. So make sure that bubble's small. Double click animated bubble. And now we should see a larger gap between the start and the end point of our bubble. So we're not finished here, folks. We need to convert this to a classic tween. So right click anywhere between frames 1 and 25 in the bubble layer and choose create classic tween. And now if you were to hit enter on your keyboard, you'd see the bubble moving up. All right, so I think we're on track, folks. I'm just finding myself in the instructions here. Okay, so next we're going to start putting it all together. So we've built an animated bubble. We've got a fish. We've got a seashell. We're gonna start building this banner. So let's go back to scene 1. To do that, you click on scene 1 in the upper left corner, and that takes us back to our main timeline, which should have nothing on it, folks. If you see something on it, you've possibly made a mistake along the way. Or maybe it's a symbol, maybe it's your fish still sitting there. So you can delete that fish from your stage. All right, so we need to edit this stage size. It's going to be a lot smaller than what it is currently. So let's go to Modify Document. Let's change the width and height to 468 by 60. 468 by 60. And hit OK. All right, so that's a bit smaller. Okay, so we're going to bring in our bubbles, which is going to create an animated background. So we're going to have some bubbles floating up. So one great thing within Animate is that once we create one symbol, an animated symbol like our animated bubbles, we can use that symbol multiple times. We can use, it's called an instance. So we can create several instances of a single symbol. So that's what we're going to do. So let's rename layer 1 in the timeline, bubbles. And from your library, drag an instance of the animated bubbles to the stage. And let's position it just below the stage because we want the bubbles to appear like they're appearing from below and disappearing above. And let's insert a frame, just a normal frame in frame 75 of the bubbles layer. So highlight, right click on frame 75 and choose Insert Frame, not Keyframe, just frame. This is how long our animation is going to be, 75 frames. All right, so I kind of want to see what this animation looks like so far. That the bubble is already animated because remember the animation is happening within the symbol. So all we have to do is drag it to our main stage to see it. Now how do I test it out? Control Enter on your keyboard. Oops, why is that not working? Control Enter on I'm on an Apple computer. For me it's Command Return. So there it is. You can see that bubble really floating, floating from the bottom to the top. We're going to use several instances of our animated bubble, and we're going to change its size to give the illusion of it being different size bubbles. and we're going to have different bubbles start at different times. Okay, so let's drag another instance of our animated bubble. So select frame 1 of the bubbles layer, drag another instance of animated bubbles and place it somewhere else below our main stage, and hit Control Enter, and there we have 2 bubbles going. Now they look exactly the same, so we want to change the size of this second bubble. So select the second bubble, open up your transform panel, there we go. So deselect everything, then by clicking away, then select that second bubble, open up your transform panel, and let's size it down to 60% of its size. Now when you hit Control Enter, look how better that looks now at a different size. So we also want some bubbles to be staggered. So we're going to insert a keyframe at frame 15 and add in a couple more animated bubbles there. So right click on frame 15 of the bubbles layer and choose Insert Keyframe. And with your playhead still sitting there, drag another instance of animated bubbles below the stage, and now hit Control Enter and see how that looks. Now we can add another one if we like. At frame 15, so make sure your playhead's at frame 15. I'm going to add another bubble, maybe change its size to 50%. Let's see how that looks. Now it's a little off. Why? Because it's the length of the animation isn't lining up with the length of the bubble animation. So that bubble isn't really working for me, but maybe if I position it a bit higher like this, let's see. No, it's not the best. So I might delete this 4th bubble. Let's just go with that for now. All right. Let's save. And we can lock the bubbles layer now. And feel free to add more bubbles. So I'm just being really picky, but you can add as many bubbles as you like. So next we're going to deal with our swimming fish. So we're going to have a fish that starts on the right side off screen, swim along, and then leave the screen and end up on the left side. So let's create a new layer, and we'll call it fish. And drag an instance of your fish off screen to the right. Now it's a little large, so turn on your transform panel and we're going to scale it. Actually use your free transform tool. So turn on your free transform tool. It's the 3rd tool from the top. Hold down the shift key and shrink it down so it matches the height. That should do. Yeah, so you want it to match the height of our stage. And our animation is going to last 75 frames. So highlight frame 75 of the fish layer. Right click on it. So right click on frame 75 of the fish layer and choose insert keyframe. And with that keyframe still selected and your playhead still sitting there, hold down the shift key and move your fish off screen to the left. So that is our end point. So we've got our start point starting at frame 1 and our end point on frame 75 where the fish is off screen. Now we need to convert that frame span to a classic tween. So right click between frames 1 and 75 of the fish layer and choose create classic tween. There we go. So if I test my movie out, you should see the fish moving along. And it's just going to loop. By default, Animate will loop your animations. Cool. Now we can lock that fish layer. I don't think I explained how to do that. What do I mean by locking? Well, in the timeline here, we see this lock symbol, and you can lock the layer so you're not going to do any destructive editing on that layer. So I recommend locking all your layers at all times. Unless you're currently working on a layer, then you'll need to unlock it. Better safe than sorry. All right, so next we're going to learn how to create a rotating animation. And that's going to be our seashell. Our seashell is going to be rotating around over here on the left side. So move your playhead back to frame 1, and let's create a new layer called seashell. And let's drag an instance of the seashell graphic symbol to the stage. It is quite large, so we need to shrink that down. So turn on your free transform tool, hold down the shift key, and shrink it down so it's close to the height of our stage. So when we're creating a rotating animation, we still need a start point and an end point. So we still need 2 keyframes. So right click on frame 75 of the seashell layer and choose insert keyframe. Now highlight frame 1 of the seashell layer or anywhere between frames 1 and 75 and choose create classic tween. Now you may be asking yourself, but we haven't done anything. We didn't create our start point and our end point. We didn't change any of the properties. We're going to do that now. With rotation, these are the steps that you take in the proper order. So with frame 1 still highlighted, so select frame 1, look to your properties panel, and you'll see under tweening, you'll see rotate. We're going to change that rotate drop down to clockwise, and then click on the number to the right and change it to 3. So if you test your movie now, Check that out. Awesome. All right, so now we can lock the seashell layer. We're getting there, folks. We're doing this. So we're going to now create, because this is a banner, we're going to bring in some text that's going to fade in and fade out. So yes, text can be animated as well. So let's create, create a new layer called type. You can call it text, type, doesn't matter. Now turn on your text tool, which is the 7th tool from the top. And in the properties here, sorry, I gotta zoom out to look at the instructions. We're gonna change the font family to Arial. So for me, it already is. The style is gonna be bold. The size is gonna be 56 points. And the color, let's choose a dark green. Now my alpha was set to 0. So I'm going to change the alpha to 100. And I'm going to choose a dark green color. So that might be the same for you too. You may see no color at all. So make sure the alpha here is 100%. Then choose your dark green color. And for me, I chose 006600. Wonderful. So on our new layer, type. So if you haven't created a new layer, create a new layer called type, and click on the stage and type the words fish design. Oops, I'm going to hit undo. Now, one thing in my text, in the properties panel, when I have the text tool selected, right now, for me, I have dynamic text here. You want to take a look at the top and make sure you have static text chosen, okay? Not dynamic. Now, make sure you have you're on your layer type. So select the layer type and click anywhere on the stage and type out fish design. Switch over to your selection tool. Then you can move the text. I'm going to just kind of put it here to the right of our rotating seashell. Now, to animate this text, we need to do what? Convert it to a symbol. So right-click on the text and choose Convert to Symbol. And let's call it My Type. Hit OK. And we want this to fade in and then fade out. So for that to happen, think about it. We need more than just 2 keyframes. So we've got a starting point of 0% opacity, then it reaches 100%, and it will stay at 100% for a period of time, then start fading out to 0%. So how many keyframes do we need? We will need 4 in total to make that happen. So let's insert some keyframes. We already have one in frame 1. Insert a keyframe on the type layer at frame 15, one at frame 45. So right click on frame 45, insert keyframe, and then one at frame 75. All right. Now we need to change the opacity in some of these keyframes. So in frame 1, highlight frame 1, Then select the text on the stage and open up your properties panel and twirl down color effect and change the style to alpha, and it should be 0%. Now to test that out, now you can convert this frame span between 1 and 15 to a classic tween. So right click anywhere between frames 1 and 15 and choose Create Classic Tween. And there you should see your text fade in. Now let's go down to frame 45, actually frame 75. Highlight frame 75, select the text on the stage, make sure color effect is twirled down, and change the style to alpha so it'll disappear. Now right click anywhere between frames 45 and 75 and choose Create Classic Tween. And hit Control Enter to look at what's going on here. Okay, so currently we've been building a animation within an ActionScript 3.0 file. How do I know that? Well, every time I test my, every time I publish my animation, a SWF, a SWF is created. That is a Flash animation export. We don't want that. We want to have an HTML5 canvas instead. So we're going to convert our animation. So hit save, first of all. We're going to convert this to HTML5. So to do that, go to File and go to Convert to and choose HTML5 Canvas. And it will ask you where you want to do that and what you want to name it. So we're just going to do it within our required file folder. Hit save. And now, hey, there's that output window saying new document generated successfully. Great. Now hit Control Enter. And your animation will open up in a browser. So this is now HTML5 with CSS3 and JavaScript. So let's take a look at our required folder now. So we've got an HTML5 file, a JavaScript file, no CSS, and an images folder that has our all of our graphics in one image file. Isn't that amazing? Which is called a sprite sheet. So our JavaScript is running to animate all these files, and it's just one image file, a ping. Pretty cool. Okay, so that should be it. If you're having any problems, you're going to want to go and follow the instructions. Go back and you can watch this video some more. And again, I definitely recommend, especially as we're starting off here, that you repeat these exercises maybe twice, just as practice. The second time will be quicker, hopefully. So hopefully it doesn't take up too much of your time. But it's important. This is all foundational moving forward in this class. So if you're having any serious problems, please email me. Excuse me, my email address is in the course documents section of Blackboard. and let me know. Okay? So I hope this went well for everyone. And next, you'll want to complete the in-class assignment, um, and you should be good to complete that on your own. Hand it in through Blackboard through the assignment section, and um, I'll be grading it, and it will be worth 7% of your final grade. Okay, good luck with that, and I'll see you guys and gals next week virtually.